Welcome to Whiteboard Friday. This week we're looking at the issue that people have been asking us, is New Zealand the next Greece? People have also been asking about Australia, is that the next Greece? It's a really complex question and because people said our last video on Greece was a little bit too simple, we're going to hit you with a macroeconomic data bomb. Prepare to receive. So is New Zealand the next Greece? It's a really big question and the answer is ultimately no. We're not going to be as bad as Greece, but things aren't as rosy as John Key's painting either. Let's look at the details. So first off, all these three economies, New Zealand, Greece and Australia, we've all got something in common. We've had quite a big shock. As we looked at in the Greece video, Greece has become, over the last few years, 30% less competitive than Germany. So that's each worker is just not as competitive as the workers in Germany. Australia, well, they've of course had a big hit to their mining sector. For example, the price of iron ore has gone from around about $80 a tonne to $50 a tonne. So you can see straight away that's between a third and a quarter of the past price. So a pretty big whack to that to the mining industry. New Zealand, similar. The price of milk solids has gone from $8.50 a kilo down to, some say, it might hit $3 a kilo. So getting down to near a third of what it used to be. So the question is, who's hurting? Okay, so Greece, the answer is everyone. Particularly anyone who's getting money from the government, because the government hasn't got any money to give out. So beneficiaries, public servants, all that sort of stuff. But really everyone in the economy is hurting because everyone is having to take a 30% pay cut to stay competitive with Germany. In Australia, of course, it's the mining sector. Our friend Gina Reinhardt has apparently lost 2/3 of her wealth in the past couple of years. And even some of her workers are getting asked to take a 10% pay cut so that they can keep their jobs. In New Zealand, of course, it is the farmers, the people who ultimately get the money. But farmers having less money means that they're going to be spending less money too. So actually the whole rural economy is going to be struggling over the next few years. All farmers? No, not all farmers. Actually, a lot of farmers are used to the ups and downs of commodity booms and busts. The real problem is for those heavily indebted farmers. And we know that about 10% of farmers are carrying 50% of the debt, particularly the ones who've recently converted to dairy. So these guys are the ones that are really going to struggle. No farmer is making money at $3 a kilo of milk solids, but these guys still have to pay money to the bank, and that means they're going to go bust. Pretty sad news for those farmers in particular, and they won't be liking John Key saying everything's okay. But the big difference between these three economies is in what's happening to the currency and the interest rates. So of course in Greece, currency stays the same. They're sharing the same currency with Germany. In Australia, the currency has dropped by 30% over the past wee while. New Zealand, it's dropped by 25%. That means we're more competitive, our exports are more competitive overseas. It is, of course, also means we pay more for petrol at the pump and for other imported goods, but it helps our exports stay competitive. Interest rates, of course, are also being cut in New Zealand and Australia, but can't be cut in Greece again because they share a currency with Germany. So in Australia, we know that interest rates have gone from 2.5 down to 2%, and in New Zealand, they've gone from 3.5 down to 3% with the final cut this week. So that means that people can borrow money more cheaply, that means they can invest, that means the economy keeps chugging along. The ultimate end result of all of this is that these shocks in the New Zealand and Australia economy aren't quite as powerful as they are in the Greek economy because we've got the currency and our interest rates can take some of that burden, can buffer some of that shock. So that's why in Greece we're seeing a recession and a big one. Australia, well, in Australia, mining is actually roughly 2/3 of their exports. So it's a big deal in Australia, and that means that they could be heading into recession. In New Zealand, the dairy industry, While we say we're a one-trick pony, the dairy industry is only a third of our exports. So it still seems unlikely that we're headed for a recession now. Thanks to the lower dollar, that means that other industries like our education industry, forestry, although forestry's struggling too, but our other export industries where they exist can pick up some of that slack, make more money to keep our economy out of recession. And recessions are dangerous because they make it harder to pay off our debt. And when you look at debt, you can see why Greece is in way more trouble. They've got an external debt of 174% of their national income. Australia sits around about 95% of their national income, and New Zealand coming in about 126% of our national income. So it's pretty big, but it's not as bad as Greece. And the big difference between New Zealand and Australia and Greece is that this debt's held by the government, this debt is held by the private sector, mostly farmers and homeowners. So it's quite a different situation in New Zealand and Australia. The final question to ask ourselves, is New Zealand like Greece, is do we have a saviour? Well, Greece, as we all know, has Angela Merkel, who isn't much of a saviour because she's going to squeeze Greece for everything they've got, as we've seen this week. So while she's still keeping them in the euro, it really is only by the skin of their teeth. And that's why ultimately we'll see this Greek crisis drag on and on. As long as they're in the euro, they can't use their currency and their interest rates to help them get out of trouble, so it's going to be a long and painful process. Don't expect to see an end to that crisis anytime soon. Australia, do they have a saviour? Well, as we can see, most of their economy, most of their exports actually comes from mining. So they're in a lot bigger trouble than we are. Their saviour probably is Mitchell Johnson. For those of you who don't know cricket, ignore everything I'm saying. But actually in Australia, that's why they're probably headed for recession. They do have some help from a lower currency and lower interest rates, but ultimately they probably will go into recession in the coming years. New Zealand, do we have a saviour? Well, we also have some help from our currency and lower interest rates, and dairy is smaller, so we have other exporters that can help pick up the slack. But really the biggest thing that we're going to see in terms of saving our economy, stopping us going into recession, is actually going to be our current account deficit is going to increase to between 6 and 7% of GDP. What the hell does that mean to the people at home? It means we're going to be borrowing and selling more stuff to foreigners. Okay? So farmers, particularly the ones that don't have a high debt, no one's making money at $3 a kilo of milk solids, but those farmers have plenty of equity in their farms, and so they will borrow money, mostly from overseas, to keep them afloat during the lean years. Not so much of a problem with that. But the ones that go bust, now that's going to be interesting, because depending on how many farms go bust, of course, the banks could potentially be in trouble. The question is, can they get anyone to buy those farms? And I think you all know the answer to the question is, who's going to buy those farms? We will probably be able to sell those farms, and banks will probably be able to get a good price for them, but not to Kiwi buyers. So actually, the saviour of New Zealand, banks, is probably going to be foreign buyers of our land over the next few years. Let's see how that goes down politically. So is New Zealand the next Greece? No. But we are going to have an issue with foreign buyers wanting to snap up our rural land for sale.